Hi everyone and welcome to Power and Freedom. I'm Alana Hunt. I'm really glad that you're joining me today. I have an amazing topic to go through today. I'm going to take you on a journey. We're going to step into a time machine and we're going to travel back to the future. So if you've ever seen Back to the Future films, then you'll know what I'm talking about. But that's our topic today. Travel back to the future with me as I show you how to use the 6 R's to change the past forever. So the time machine. And you know what? We've heard for years and years and years you can't change the past. And I'm not going to say that you can go back and change the events of the past in the way that you can, rekindle old relationships or bring back people who are gone or change your actions or any of those things or change situations in a very physical way. I'm not going to suggest we do that because I don't have one of those kind of time machines. I don't have a traveling car like Marty McFly and Doc had, but we do have everything else. I do have everything else to take you on a journey back to the future and to help you understand how you can actually change the past forever, and that, by traveling back to the future, what's in front of you is also going to change. So that's what we're going to do today. So traveling back to the future. So if we think about that, the first step in traveling back to the future, and we're going to be talking about 6 different R's, or they all start with re, and they're all kind of about, redoing something. So the first one is to rewind. And if you think about the future and you kind of think, well, we want to go back, or the idea that the past is behind us, then we kind of want to wind the clock back. So we're going to rewind. And so what we're going to be able to do when we rewind is we're going to look at certain situations or experiences, and we're going to do some things with those. So now, we're all different, so we've all got different experiences. So this is about finding something that is painful for you in your past, something that you feel holds you back, something that you feel triggered about. So maybe every time something happens, you feel a certain way and you just keep feeling that way. Something that's happened in your life that you're struggling with. Perhaps you're holding a grudge, maybe you're blaming somebody, maybe you're struggling to forgive yourself, maybe something has happened that has caused you a lot of pain and you're struggling to maybe let that go, or struggling to move beyond it, and in some ways it's holding you back from the life that you truly want. And so my message of Power and Freedom is always about the life that you truly want. So how do we rewind? So to rewind, what we're doing is we're emotionally or mentally, we're going back to an event or an experience that's happened at a time in our life that is painful or that carries an emotional charge. I'm just going to stop for 1 second and talk to you a little bit about, and I talk often about the brain, but I'm just going to jump back and talk a wee bit about the brain here for a moment, and how memories are formed. And why we remember some things more than others. And so what happens with your brain is that it takes in all the information that happens. Every single tiny little bit of information your brain is taking in and it's absorbing it. But what happens is that when there's an emotional charge, or when something, we have an energetic response, which an emotion is energy in motion. When we have an emotional response to something, it has a stronger power. So it kind of creates a new synapses or a new path. It's almost like that's burned on your brain in a way that lots of other things that happen around you aren't so much. I mean, if every single thing that happened was burned on our brain, we would just be bombarded with memories and things that we wouldn't actually be able to function very well, would we? So, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what happens with emotion. So when we rewind, what we're actually doing is we're going back to a time that we felt emotional about, that was difficult or was painful, or in some way we felt guilty about, or some sort of strong emotion that's around that. Because if we can connect with that, then we can follow the next part, which is about actually going back to the future. So we start with rewind. So see if you can connect with something that's painful for you. So maybe somebody that you knew very well and maybe you cared about them a lot, behaved in a way that was really hurtful for you. Perhaps it was super painful. You know, maybe it was something that you've really struggled to move past. Maybe something somebody did to you that you really feel, I mean, it isn't your fault, and that's perfectly valid that it's not your fault, but something that's happened that really is affecting you in your life today, because that's the best example that we can do. So we want to rewind to that moment. We want to think about that experience, you know, not in a, I don't want you to go into your emotions and start feeling the feelings that you felt at that time, but I want you to connect with the memory. So when we connect with that memory, we can kind of put ourselves back into that space. We're aware of those emotions. We don't have to step into them and feel them again, but we can be aware that they're there. We can be aware of their intensity. So when we do that, then we're going to be ready for the next step. So once you've done your rewind and you've got that moment or that experience, or, you know, it could be a period of time, but ultimately that experience, then we're going to use something called reframe. Now, this can be quite challenging, because what we're doing is we're bringing up a memory, and the memory brings emotions, and that memory feels very real to us, and it is real to us. So when we're going to be looking at reframing, what we're doing now is we're looking at that experience, and then we're just stepping away from it for a moment, and we want to have another look at it. Essentially, that's what reframing is. We want to have another look at it. So that's why I don't want you to connect too much with the emotion. I want you to be able to step away from it and look at it objectively, if you like, in a way that is unemotional, so that you can actually see what is happening there. So when we reframe, what we're going to be looking at is stepping away and thinking, is there something else that I'm not seeing here? Is there another side to this story? Remembering that there's always more than one side, but when we have a memory that has emotion attached, the imprint is from our perspective, and very, very strongly from our perspective, because, hey, you know, that's logical. It's our lives. It's us that's experienced it. So that's how the memory's imprinted. But when we can step away from it a little bit, we can ask some questions. So if it's in a relationship situation, which a lot of the most painful things that we carry in our lives come from our relationships with other people. So if it's come from a relationship with other people, then who is the other person? What is their experience? What has happened to them? What might you know about them that has brought them to this moment that we're talking about, that, you know, we've rewound to this moment? What has brought them there? And what might this experience or this moment look like to them from their point of view? This is not about negating your feelings in any shape or form, because you feel how you feel, and you're perfectly justified in the emotions that you have. But sometimes the memory that we carry is colored by those emotions, because as emotion, we're not able to see the whole picture. We see it very much through the emotions that we felt at the time. And a lot of the time we don't go back and revisit that and go, well, actually, and so this is kind of what this reframing is. It's about going back and having another look, adding a fresh pair of eyes, if you like. I know they're still your eyes, but when you can step away from the emotion, you can just look at it a little bit differently, and maybe ask yourself some questions around what might this look like from a different point of view. It can be very difficult, you know, if you feel really hurt or really angry, or you're holding a grudge, or you feel like somebody's been, you know, super unkind or abused you, or whatever. There's a strong, strong connection that you have with that memory and with that experience. So the idea of stepping away and kind of having a look at it from somebody else's point of view, you just might not want to do that. And I get that completely. But here's the thing. Those memories that you carry, with the emotion attached, they're impacting your life today. They may be impacting on how you relate to other people, or what you expect from other people, or what you expect in relationships with other people. And that was that situation, and it actually has nothing to do with right now. And when we carry these memories and we carry the emotional charge around those memories with us forward into our lives, then we're destined to repeat them. And I've been talking a lot about how your brain is programmed and how it, a lot of what we feel and say and do is on automatic pilot, and it's kind of deeply programmed in your subconscious mind. So what we want to be doing here is actually changing the subconscious programming, if you like, or the subconscious brain imprint of this event or this experience, so that you know, we can actually do the next step, which is to release. It's very difficult to just talk about this topic without actually doing it with you, but I wanted to introduce it and just go through some of the tools that you can use. So you're going to rewind to a particular event or experience. You're going to reframe that by asking questions and adding a new set of eyes, asking yourself what it might look like if I'm standing on the other side of this experience. Because what I've found, and I bet it's happened to you too, you'll talk to two different people, right? And particularly when it's a couple, so in like a romantic relationship or a married couple, or, you know, live-in partners or whatever, and they've had an argument, let's say, and you speak to one of them about the argument and they tell you one story, and then you speak to the other person and they tell you a totally different story. But for each of them, that experience that they're telling you is very real. That's their experience. That's the truth for them. And so what happens is that we get this understanding of a situation, but it's really colored by who we are, where we sit, how we feel at the time, and the emotions that come as a result. And so we carry that forward. Yeah, we carry that forward into our future, and it can build resentment, and it can create problems for us as well as problems in our relationships. So that's why we need to do the reframe, and we need to have another look at it from a different point of view, so that we can release the emotional charge around it. So that energy that's frenetic, that every time you connect with that memory, you get angry, or you get sad, or you feel resentful, or it makes you feel shameful, or whatever the emotion that comes up when you actually connect with the feelings around that experience, we want to be able to release those. Because that's a huge part of the memory. Because a memory is just really stuff that happens. But when we add our emotions to it, it has a lot of power in our lives. So we want to be able to release some of that emotion. And when we reframe something, it kind of allows us to step away from our own perspective, where we're completely immersed in our own truth, and go, well, perhaps there's a different truth here. And the minute you do that, the minute you open your mind to the possibility that it isn't 100% how you remember it, what happens is you automatically release some of the emotional charge around it. You have no choice, because you've actually opened the possibility for something else, and just in that moment it kind of, it releases a little bit of that energy and a little bit of that emotion. So we want to be able to release that. And then, as I've talked about before, when you release something, we can't live in a vacuum, right? So if you want to let go of something, or you want to change something, you know, whatever it is, you want to release it, or let it go, for want of a better term. But you can't just leave this empty void. You know, you have to replace it with something, which is the next step. The fourth step in our R's is to replace. So once you've rewound to the moment and you've reframed it, then you've released some of the emotion around it, then you want to replace it. And it kind of happens automatically, because if you've reframed it and you've totally added a new perspective to what it was that you remembered or that you saw, then moving forward, when you're looking at that memory again, it automatically looks different. So you've replaced an old memory with a whole bunch of emotions that are tied into it, with one that looks a little bit different. You can never go back, actually. And this is the fantastic thing. This is why I say it's back to the future. We're actually going back, and we're changing the past. We're changing the memory, so that as you go forward, the memory you carry is different. And that releases a lot of the power that that experience has on your life. It helps to free you if you're feeling stuck. It helps to make you let go of grudges, or maybe be able to interact in a way that is more loving or kind or caring, or bring you to an awareness that actually there were signposts that you could have seen that maybe you didn't see, or that maybe even acknowledge that there's some part in there that you could take responsibility for. Perhaps there's a situation where on a particular day or at a particular time things weren't going well for you, and maybe in some way that impacted on that situation. You need to discover what is true for you, what you're prepared to do, and what you're comfortable to do. But this is really pushing you outside of your comfort zone. I'm not going to lie here and say this stuff is easy, because it's not. Because you have a memory, and that memory is so true and it's so deeply ingrained that the idea of changing it, your brain doesn't want to do it. And actually, sometimes we just want to hold on to those feelings of anger and hatred or resentment or feeling like a victim or whatever it is. We want to hold on to that. It's very easy for those memories and those emotions to become a part of who we are, and we kind of define ourselves by it in a way, but it isn't who you are. It's stuff that happened, and it's tied up with your response to what happened, and then it becomes a memory and it becomes very real. But is it? When you step away and you reframe it, it can be something very different instead. So we're going to release the emotional charge, and we're going to replace it with the new memory, the one that's a bit more balanced, the one that incorporates the other side, the possibility that you don't have all the information, that there's another side to the story, there's something else, excuse me, going on that you haven't brought with you, into the future. You've only brought part of the experience, not the whole thing. You've brought it from how a particular moment in that event or in that experience made you feel. That's the thing you remember. You may not remember the hour before it or the hour after it or the 2 weeks before it or the 6 weeks before that usually there's a build up to something. You may not remember that, but you will absolutely remember the moment when you felt something strongly, and that it becomes the memory. A lot of the rest of it just sort of disappears in the back of your brain, and you can't find it. So how much of what actually happened are you bringing forward? And a lot of the time we're just not bringing the whole truth, we're just bringing bits and pieces of it. And I think in truth we're pretty much doing that all the time. So when we can have a look at a memory or something that we find difficult, and we can rewind to it, we can reframe it, we can release the emotion around it, or at least part of it, and we can replace it with the new story, a more balanced, rounded story, then we can recharge that memory. Because you remember I said at the beginning that the charge around our memories, the emotion, which is energy and motion, is what actually imprints it on our brain and makes it a memory, as opposed to something that just goes past, because so much of what we experience is like, oh, just what happened, what did I do today? Did a whole bunch of stuff, but you can't remember it. You can't, you can't connect to it. So what we need to do in order for the new story, the replaced story, to become your reality and to make a difference in your future, you need to recharge that memory. So you need to then add an emotion to it, if you like. And not, if you've realized that maybe in some way you did something that's affected the other person and made them sad, and perhaps that's part of what's happened and why you felt the way you did, or maybe the way they responded to you. I don't want you to feel guilty or any of that. That's not what this is about. It's not about going from blame into guilt or into anything like that. This is about then going, I need to recharge this memory in a really positive way. So if I feel like somebody's done me harm, but I've recognized that actually there was some extenuating circumstances, or there was some build-up that happened, or they had a really tough thing happen to them at that time, and they probably weren't showing up in a way that they would normally, and yeah, they hurt me, and yeah, it was painful, and yes, it was awful, and I'm just talking on the surface here. Obviously there's deep experiences and very, very painful experiences that are much more difficult, certainly things in childhood, much more difficult to use this process. You can still do it, but you have to be able to rewind to something that you remember. It's very difficult to do otherwise. However, as long as you have a memory or an impression of something, even if there's more that you don't remember, you can still use that one moment to try and look at the other side of the equation. What was life like for that person? What was going on for them? Where are they now in their life? How did that experience impact them? And then you can bring some empathy, you can bring some kindness, you can bring, and those are the emotions that we want to recharge this experience with, your replaced story or your replaced memory. We want to recharge it with some compassion, with some empathy, with some kindness, with some relief, anything that generates an emotional response in your body, because that's where we hold our emotions. It's not just in your head. Obviously what's in your head is really important, and that's where we think we are certainly accessing a lot of the memory from there. But actually, if you think about something and see if you can do this for a moment, connect to something that feels painful, a memory, just think about something. Don't get emotional, but just kind of think back to something that happened, and then tell me where you feel it, because you're accessing it from here, but you're feeling it in your body. And so that's where the emotion is. So that's why we need to recharge our replaced story, the story that we're replacing, or the memory that, we've released some of the emotion that is harmful to us and maybe blocking us or hurting us in some way. And we've replaced the story with one that's a little bit more balanced. And now we want to recharge that memory. We want to recharge that experience with some kindness, with some empathy, with some understanding, with some enlightenment, with some, oh gosh, okay, oh, I never saw that. I didn't remember that. Oh, I forgot that bit. Or, you know what, that person was having a really hard time at that moment. And that isn't about saying it's okay for people to treat me like this. That's not what this is about. And you don't even have to go as far as forgiveness. If you don't want to head into forgiveness, you don't have to. Forgiveness, by the way, is not about saying it's okay. It's about releasing this charge. And that's really what we're doing here when we're going back to the future. Part of this, whether you call it forgiving, whether you call it, whatever you want to call it, we're actually just rewriting the past. Yeah, so that's another R, rewriting, reframing, same thing. And so when we recharge that memory with new emotions, then when we connect with it in the future, if it comes up for us or we feel triggered by a similar situation, it's lost a lot of its impact. It's not going to hurt you in the same way that it did before. And as we recharge that new story, that becomes what we remember. That becomes the last R, the remember. You can't, once you change the memory, once you remember this differently, you'll find it really difficult to connect to how you used to feel or how you used to see it. It doesn't exist anymore. You've changed it. You've released the emotional charge around it so it doesn't have its hold on you. You've replaced it with something that's more balanced and something that looks very different from the story or the experience that you told yourself you had had. Yeah? And now when you remember it, it's different. You can never go back. If you want to hold on to the old memory, the one that's hurting you, the one that's making you feel sad, making you feel angry, blocking you from the future that you want or the life that you want, well, you can hang on to that. That's completely your choice. But if you want to live with power and freedom, and you truly want that and to create the life that you want, then this is one thing that you can do in your life that is super, super powerful to change your future. We're going back to the future, going back to create a new past and a new future. And by putting those things together, taking our time machine on a journey to the past, we're connecting with our future in a very real and very, very powerful way, because we're actually healing something that's hurting us. And by getting rid of that, by remembering differently, by reframing the experience, then that is no longer hurting us in the future. It's not going to show up on repeat, because that's what happens, yeah? You have a painful experience, you have a memory of it, you have an emotional charge around it, it makes you feel a certain way, and then something else happens in the future that seems really similar. And you're right back at that first experience. it feels the same, you respond the same, and you're sure it's going to be the same outcome. And so what do? We isolate ourselves, we reject people, we push people away, or we hurt people before they have the chance to hurt us, because we know this is like the other time and it hurt too much the last time, so we're not going to do it again. And so this is what our brain is learning, that when we hold on to experiences and we remember them with the emotion of the time, then we carry them into the future, where our brain will show us another experience that matches it, because that's its job. Yeah. So you rewind, you reframe, ask yourself some questions, try have a look at it from another perspective. It's not easy. And you know what? One of the things I found when I first did this was that I got really resistant to the idea that there was another point of view, because this was my truth. Or I thought it was. It was the story I'd been telling myself for years and years about this particular experience or this particular event. And so there was a lot of resistance. I was like, no, I don't want to accept that there's another point of view, because this is my truth. And if I let go of my truth, then where does that leave me? I had wrapped up so much of these stories and these memories in my identity as to who I saw myself as. And in order to reframe some of these things, where would that leave me? Who would I be then? Not easy. But it was one of the most powerful tools that I ever learned. And, you know, it's, as I say, it's very difficult to do it in a half-hour talk. But it's something that's super, super powerful that you can do in your life. And when you reframe it, you kind of have no choice but to release the emotions, because they're no longer valid. They don't make sense anymore. You know, where those emotions made total sense in the story that you told yourself, when you change the story, when you change the narrative, when you reframe or rewrite the story around it, those emotions don't make any sense. You can't hold them anymore. There's no part of your body or brain or anything that can continue to hold it, because it's no longer a truth. And so those emotions will automatically release, and you can actively release them as well, you know, add another layer to that. And then you're going to replace it. The new story fills the space. You've reframed the story or rewritten the story. You've released the emotion around it. And then the new story just fills the gap naturally. The old one's gone. Can't even connect to it anymore, because once the emotions are gone, it doesn't exist. Which is a really good lesson for life, you know, when we can allow our emotions to flow through us instead of hooking on to every moment that we feel a certain way and really investing ourselves in those emotions. Then what happens is that we can still hold the memories, but they don't have the power to hurt us the way that, you know, when we attach destructive emotions to it, how that can hurt us in our future. So it replaces the story that you had written, and then you recharge it with new emotions, with kindness, with empathy, with understanding, with maybe a little bit of, oh my goodness, why didn't I see that? And it totally changes the whole thing. And then when you remember, which is the last part, you remember it another time, it's totally different. It's a new story. It's a whole different experience. And you know what? You're free of it. You've used your power to do this process. You've gone back to the future and you've completely transformed this experience that was causing you so much pain, blocking your way, you know, not allowing you to see the truth. And now when you remember differently. And what happens is that this experience, this going back to the future that you've done, becomes part of the new memory. You remember doing it. So if you're ever tempted to forget and try and connect to the old story, you'll remember this process and you'll go, no, it's not like that. And the amazing thing is, because you've done it in one part of your life, you start doing it in lots of parts of your life. It's an exercise. It's well worth doing. That's the time machine. That is going back to the future. And you are literally changing the past. You know, no, you can't go back into that moment and behave differently or respond differently. But you can choose to respond differently in the future. When something else shows up that looks similar, it's not going to have, this memory is not going to have the power over you that it once did. It's not going to cause you to react in the same way, to want to run away or to hurt someone, or, you know, it's not going to have that hold on you anymore. You're literally free of it. How amazing does that feel? It can be a bit sad. Sometimes it's hard to let go of things that we've wanted to hang on to or we've told ourselves. It can be very, very difficult. But if you do, and if you're prepared to do it, you change your life. Change your story, you change your life, and you change your future. And you begin to see the world around you very differently, and therefore you experience it differently. And it's amazing. And it allows all the wonderful good things to come to you that before might have been, you know, these other memories or these other experiences or these feelings or whatever were kind of blocking your best life. Now you're free. What do you want to do now? How do I want to respond to people now? If a situation like this comes up again, am I going to take a moment to think? Am I going to step back and have a look at what's actually happening and make sure that I'm not taking a story that's only part of the truth into the future? Because if you can do that in the moment that you're in, when you're in it, you're taking forward memories that are balanced, that don't have an emotional charge, that aren't going to get in the way of everything that you want. And that's what this is about. You can go back to the future if you like, or you can change it in the moment that you're in. You can consciously choose to see that moment differently, to have a look at the person that's in front of you. They're not the enemy. Most of the time they're not. You know, sometimes people are really cruel and nasty and they're not people that you want to have in your life, and that's a whole different process. But in terms of where you feel people, particularly in relationships, have done you wrong or they've hurt you, free yourself. That's what going back to the future is. That's what the time machine is about. It's about freeing yourself so that you can move forward with, you know, love in your heart and kindness and joy, and see more of the good stuff rather than continue to be shown the experiences that match the painful ones. Anyway, that's today. I hope that's been helpful. That was the time machine. Have a fantastic weekend.